sent back to the department for approval, and then ultimately that is returned to the treasurer's office and sent to a third-party payroll company. So we're basically paying somebody to issue our checks and do our W-2s, but we're doing all of the labor-intensive process of a payroll without the benefit of the contracts we're paying for somebody to do our payroll. We've started exploring options for automating this process, either through the vendor who's currently contracted to provide our payroll or through other options. We haven't yet figured out if that can be separated, and I don't know if it makes sense to separate, to have one automating your payroll infrastructure but then having somebody else do your checks. But what this automated payroll system would look like is that everybody who is who does shift work, who's on a shift, would have to sign in through some form, clock in through some form of technology, whether that be a time clock, an app, or a call-in. And the time would be defaulted into the system. It would then go to the supervisor for approval and then automatically populate the payroll. It would save a tremendous amount of time that would either result in the potential elimination of positions or the freeing up of staff to focus on other key tasks. I think that will require us to dig down a lot deeper in each department to be able to assess that. But from a high-level standpoint, that is an area where we'd like to move forward, and we're evaluating options to bring forward to you. There's a longer-term conversation to have about where to locate that, whether payroll and benefits should stay in the treasurer's office, whether they should be under the human resource function, or whether they would be potentially located under a finance department. I don't think we have to make that decision right now, but I think we should know that that's out there depending on how we decide to proceed with reorganizing some of the other functions. The important takeaway here is that we do need to bring our payroll system into the almost 2020. We need to get up to date with technology and use the systems that are available to us. I hope that any cost associated with that could be recouped from eliminating redundancies and by centralizing that function in a central way, either at HR, the treasurer's office, or in a finance department. I've talked with several of you over the first few months that I've been here about public works and capital planning. I think this is the area where I think this is the only thing in the plan right now where I would really love to have some indication from you if this is a direction you want to go in. I believe very strongly that we should move towards the adoption of the Department of Public Works as outlined in the plan. That will require changing some local laws, and before I ask Fred and Human Resources and the staff to begin that heavy lift, I would like to have some recognition that you concur with moving in that direction. Once you've made that determination, and if somebody wants to do that tonight, fine, and if you would like us to do that at another meeting, that's also, you're in control of this timeline. But once that decision is made, we can go forward with creating a position, with recruiting and filling and getting somebody into that has the capacity to oversee those different areas on the short term. On the long term, I would like to look at the possibility of fully integrating the workforce crews and creating a more flexible, dynamic workforce that can be deployed to meet whatever our public works and infrastructure needs are. That would require cross-training employees in right now separate departments as they are fully integrated into a unified workforce. It would probably also require some civil service work and renegotiating some of this with the union through the next contract. As we shift to focus on talking about capital improvement infrastructure, capital improvement planning and infrastructure, we will bring forward a more traditional capital improvement plan this year that I haven't seen from the current year. We've finished the road rating assessment for all of the roads throughout the county. I think the current assessment, is Bill or Dan here? I think it's 47% of our roads are currently rated as deficient. And that's just our roads. That's not, we don't have a full bridge or culvert inventory yet. We know we don't have a comprehensive, Gary's got a number of plans in place or needs in place documented for buildings and grounds. We need to pull all of that together into a unified plan, multi-year plan that says, these are our needs, these are the expected costs, and this will be the timeline to potentially replace them. And then we need to have the fiscal and policy commitment long-term to invest in those capital needs and in equipment replacement. We have been evaluating the enterprise fleet management solution. It's been a comprehensive effort led by Lynn Marinelli, as well as several participating departments in social services, health. Bill's been participating from Public Works. The sheriff and Lieutenant Wellauer have been participating. And we do intend to bring forward a resolution at Ways and Means this month to replace the resolutions that were tabled, was it last month or the month before, for the sheriff's vehicles, the health and human services and social services vehicles. We believe that investment and getting on that replacement cycle will help create the commitment to turn the vehicles over at a time when they still have value, rather than continue to run them into the ground and then discard them for no money. It will basically level out our investment over a period of time and ensure that we stay in adequate and safe and functioning vehicles. That formal capital improvement plan, capital improvement budget and planning process, I envision an important role for planning and the budget director working with, and the Treasurer's Office working in conjunction with the various departments to assemble their capital requests. And I can tell you that with the investment of time and projects that Steve's been drafted to and his staff's been drafted to over the last several months, I think it was a footnote recommendation in the CGI report that suggested looking at a deputy director. But I can tell you that I've taxed the planning department probably more than it has been in a long time, in part because my vision of planning is comprehensive. It is organizational planning, it is strategic planning, and it is, I think, a more robust vision of planning than is sometimes looked at in government. And that's perhaps, I look at it that way because that was the path and background I came up through. And also there's a skill set there that's often not tapped into for more comprehensive assessments that we are tapping into now. So I think it's important to look at, as positions come up and as budget is available, to look at creating that position, hopefully not too far off in the future. There was a number of recommendations related to our assigned counsel office and criminal justice reform. I think that what's most important for you to know right now in terms of our short-term planning is that and I think everybody knows this, the current funding allocations for the assigned counsel office are inverse. The predominance of funding is currently coming from the Youth Bureau, and the predominance of the position is currently focused on assigned counsel. We likely have a solution to that doesn't rely on general fund expenditures, which I think is important because that's maybe unique in some of these recommendations. And that is, Lloyd and I met last week with the State Office of Indigent Legal Services. For those of you who weren't at the State of the County, there's a widespread recognition in government that state governments have failed to live up to their obligations under Gideon, which guarantees people a right to counsel. There's a Supreme Court decision that guarantees the right to counsel. The state is trying to rectify that by making a massive investment in indigent legal services, and we are fortunate to be seeing a large influx in state money into this area. We are tasked with currently putting together a 5-year plan for how to provide comprehensive legal services to people who need them. And what we've been talking about is looking at a year 1 plan that shifts our funding to a full-time office, which would then be funded by the state. And then looking at a more comprehensive legal service solution that might involve institutional representation. And that could take the form of a couple of ways. One way would be a traditional public defender's office, which the report notes we might be right on the cusp of. But what the report doesn't discuss, and is another viable option, would be the idea of incubating and creating an office of legal aid that we could use these resources to fund. The timing of this is, I think, fortunate that we have a wide degree of flexibility in the plan we create and submit to the state. They've offered technical assistance to help us prepare that plan, and as soon as it's submitted and approved, we can start tapping into our year one resources. Is that correct? So that is one of our new top priorities. I think that in order to do that, we need to look at some of the other recommendations in this area, namely moving Stop DWI probably to the Department of Health as recommended. And then there's the recommendation looking at the Veteran Services Office of the Aging and Youth Bureau. Those recommendations could take the form of a number of, they could go a number of different ways. I think the recommendation in the report was to look at including them in the health department. Others have suggested that it makes more sense to consolidate them in the social services area because they serve a lot of the same populations. And a third option would be to create a Department of Human Services where they stood together as their own department. And my preference would probably be to move them into social services, where I think there's a number of complementary programs and offices in that agency and a management infrastructure that is capable of overseeing that, and especially with overseeing some of the contract services that those offices provide. I'm not married to that, and I'm not asking for any approval with that right now, because I really hope that this will be this is an opportunity for the legislature to begin discussing these recommendations, and there's some policy directions here that I certainly need your input and advice and counsel on in which way you'd like me to bring forward. But needless to say, I do think that we don't need to have each of those as a standalone department, and either integration and folding them into a larger department or a standalone department makes a lot of sense. On probation, and Jay apologizes for not being here. He would have been here last week, but he had another obligation tonight. My recommendation is to move forward right now with hiring two probation officers. The intent would be that once our Raise the Age plan is submitted, that those two would be able to move into that position for the Raise the Age, and hopefully that would be reimbursed. But even if it's not, they're so under-resourced in probation that I would think we would still move forward with hiring in the future. So I foresee asking for 2 positions this year, along with 2 next year, to get the caseload to where it's more manageable. And I think there's an important policy consideration that we have to have here related to our space in the county court. We are currently in the process of negotiating a lease for a space with parole, who initially moved in there on a temporary basis. There's an important question I think we need to ask about whether you want to move forward with leasing that space to parole, or whether that provides the very much needed space that the probation department needs to add 2 or 4 more people. We're definitely going to need to add 2 through Raise the Age, and the caseloads warrant probably adding 4, according to the consultant recommendations. I was looking to split the difference with 2 for Raise the Age and 2 new ones for the overall probation department. But we also have to keep in mind we can't just hire people. We have to have somewhere for them to work as well. So before we make any decision there, I think we have to figure out how we're going to operate that department in the space that we have. There's ongoing conversations based on